Everybody, welcome to day 3 of Athena, where we'll be kicking things off with Hannah Smithies and a talk around data for big ideas. So take it away, Hannah. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Adam. It's Alex. Alex, dear me. It's great to be here at Athena. Hi everyone, my name's Hannah Smithies. I'm a product manager in the Ministry of Justice, and currently I'm looking after a fairly wide variety of services aimed at different members of the public using the justice system. I've been a product manager for about 4 years now in both the public and the private sector. And in that time, I've come to believe that metrics and analytics is basically probably the best weapon that we have at our disposal. With it, you can create an extremely focused strategy, measure that progress, and derive insights that fuel properly meaningful development. What I also love about data is it encourages a level of intellectual honesty that you really have to aspire to as someone with a big idea that you want to get into the world. If something's not working, and I promise you that oftentimes things will not, then data can help you recognize this and pivot more quickly onto something that hopefully does work. However, it's really easy to get overwhelmed by the very concept. And I feel like when I first started thinking about data, I came from a history background. This is the sort of image that came to mind. I hope this reference isn't too old. It's the Matrix. I kind of thought about data and analytics as something that was a sort of special mystical world that's only understood by statisticians, mathematicians, and you have to be able to sort of speak a special language to be able to understand it. It really doesn't help that when you search for information about like product analytics, there's so much terminology: bounce rates, active users, conversion rates, sessions, without much information about their sort of significance or how you can apply these directly to your own project. But I have come to believe that you don't need to be a maths genius to learn the basics of data and start harnessing its power. You know, this is a completely learnable skill, and with some curiosity and maybe a bit of an experimental mindset and understanding that you might get things wrong quite a bit, you can really start to make use of analytics and use it to your advantage for any idea. So today I'm going to share with you how I like to think of the basics of strategic data and analytics. I'm absolutely still learning. I love reading about it. I have listened to lots of people who are much more smart than I am giving me information about it, but this is a sort of framework that I have found extremely helpful across all my different products. So I hope you find something useful from it as well. Okay, so to kick off, I'd like to ask everyone a question. And so get your thinking hats on to write answers in the chat. So I want to ask, as a team that's about to build a brand new product, and I assume that a lot of people listening are in fact in the hackathon, so this is very much you. How do we know what people want? So this is before we've actually built anything, before we've done any development. How do we know what people want? I'm just waiting because there's a lag. So I'm very much hoping that everyone's got their thinking hats on. Awesome. Yeah, user research for sure. That's a really important way to do it. I'll just hold on for 2 ticks just for any more answers. Tracking. Jess, woman after my own heart. Absolutely. Okay. I'll have a look as the other things kind of come up. But basically, I mean, there's a few things that we can do before we even start building anything. We can understand what we've got. Oh, brilliant. We've got complaints. We've got feedback from existing products. So absolutely, a really important thing that you can do is market research. So you can look at competitors, you can look at other people with similar ideas or what ideas have been tried before and in what in what situations, and you can try and come up with hypotheses about why these did and didn't work to apply to our own idea. And so absolutely, ratings, feedback, complaints, feedback from existing comments, products, this is really useful information. I guess the slight issue with this is that no one will have ever done anything like you have, almost certainly, and release it in exactly the same way. So while this information is really useful, you're only ever going to be able to develop hypotheses that you can like kind of try and test out with your own product. The other thing that we can look at, which is really, really important, is this user research. User research is quite a wide area, and it can cover things like interviewing, surveys, focus groups, all sorts of different ways to do it. And it is so important. User research means that we can get into the minds of our users, so we can understand their likes, their dislikes, their habits, their thought patterns. We can really get inside their mind and try and get to know them. However, there is a bit of a weakness in user research, which is brains are fallible. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Humans are very emotional beings, and more often than not, we're acting on intuitive, gut level decision making. This means that people can be talking to you about what they need from a product, and they can really believe that they're helping you and telling the truth. Like, why, definitely, most people want to help you. They want to get as close to the truth as they possibly can, and really make you understand. But you can rationalize all sorts of things, and it might not actually reflect how you would behave. So let's just talk about a stupid, kind of silly example for this. Let's just imagine that you are going to create a new app. And this app tells you when ice cream trucks are in your area. An ice cream truck is in your area. You can pre-order an ice cream on the app. Then when you hear the music outside, you can go and get your ice cream. I'm not sure how sensible this business idea is, but it's the one that came to me because I heard the ice cream van outside. So you interview me, say, as a potential user. I love ice cream and I get annoyed that I keep on missing the truck when it's outside. So I am the perfect person who might be in your user group. So if you asked me about this today, well, at the moment, I am thinking a lot about my own health. And I've been working from home for a long time because of lockdown, and I'm not getting very much exercise from my usual commute. And we're coming up to summer, and so I want to wear much more revealing clothes, but not too revealing, mum, because I think she's watching. So today I might say to you, okay, love your app, love your idea, but the most important thing to me is that this ice cream van has got healthy options. I'm really trying to get the correct balance of fiber and protein, and I'm trying to cut down on sugar, so I don't want high sugar content. And you guys might hear this several times from different people sort of mentioning this health thing. You say, oh, great, there's a gap in the market. There's really exciting, healthy ice cream van app concept. And then maybe you base your entire strategy on health. So you've got 17 healthy, flavorful options. I don't know. I'm thinking like spinach and mango popsicles, or like, I don't know, pineapple ice, or high protein soy based ice cream. I don't know if that sounds good or bad. I'm not entirely sure if that's appetizing. And maybe then have like one or two chocolatey ice creams for the kids and the non-health conscious. So you launch in a couple of weeks, and I download your app because I'm a super fan, and I'm out in the wild. And that day I am a bit tired and I'm a bit hungry. And I look through and I scroll through all of your brand new super healthy ice cream flavors. And then I get to the chocolate fudge whippy that's supposed to be for kids at the end. And I've just done a conference presentation and I think I deserve a treat. So in that scenario, what do you think I might pick? In reality, so user research is brilliant. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it because it's so important, but you have to take things with a pinch of salt because people can be terrible predictors about how they'll behave. We are over optimistic, we are overconfident, we tend to idealize situations quite a lot. The reasons for this are myriad and fascinating, but unfortunately outside the scope of this talk. I was thinking about doing a big thing on this, but then realized I didn't have time. But if you're interested, then there's some really brilliant books at the moment. So there's things that I really recommend, like Thinking Fast and Slow, The Chimp Paradox. Derren Brown actually has an audiobook about it at the moment, or an audio series on Audible, which I also highly recommend. Really, really interesting things. But the upshot is User research is incredibly important, but you can only derive hypotheses from it. It won't necessarily tell you how people will behave or if people will want your product when it's out there. So data is the weapon that helps you balance this effect out, because ultimately, and I know this is annoying because no one likes a trick question, but you can't really know what people will like until you give it to them and then you measure their response. So user research, market analysis gives us loads of information. We can create hypotheses. Analytics, data, and measurement allow us to behave like scientists and understand how people truly behave. So how does using data kind of work? Well, we have to think of our products and ideas as just grand experiments. So in the example I just gave about the ice cream, maybe it would have been better to start with one healthy ice cream and see how it performs. How do we see how it performs? Well, we could measure how many people clicked on the option, how many people bought it, how this compared to the rate of sales and things for other ice creams that we have. We could actually even, you don't need to have a product as long as you're very careful about not overpromising and you don't take people's money, but you could just try marketing it or posting it on social media and measure responses and interest. Then, if you're happy with the results and you're like, okay, this has been a successful experiment, you can invest more. So hopefully I've now convinced you of the value of data. What I'd like to talk about now is kind of like how to get started and how to apply this for your own idea. So how can we start using data to our best advantage? Well, there isn't really an one size fits all approach. There are some really interesting frameworks where people have attempted to do that, and I'd really encourage you to check them out. There's a heart model that's from Google, and my favorite, the R model, which is also called the pirate model, which is for sort of aimed at startups. However, these sort of tend to assume that you have a certain type of business. I've worked in the business to business private sector and in the public sector as a product manager, and none of the frameworks I've ever come across has quite been a fit for the product that I was looking after. And if you think about it, this makes sense, right? So, if you're looking after a survey platform for a business, it could be very different from a messaging app, and a messaging app would be very different from an ice cream van app. So what I'm trying to kind of put together is a more universal thought process that takes you from top down. So from your vision to your strategy to your metrics. And the process looks a little bit like this. So you have your vision, and vision is just a fancy pants way of saying what you're trying to achieve, or what the kind of ultimate goal of your business is. This can break down into individual goals, and I'll talk a little bit more about how I think of these, or how I like to break down or think of those goals in a hot second. But normally, goals are implicit within the vision that you set out. They should follow quite naturally. From that, you can derive success metrics. So this is the first time we're really looking at data. So how do we put a number against a goal that tells us if we're done, if we're successful, what that looks like? From those success metrics, I like to think of them as indicators. So these are sort of other metrics that tell you if you're making progress, or they help you to troubleshoot where problems might be happening with trying to achieve your success metrics. This is all a little bit theoretical, so I'm going to have to explain it a little bit more. And I'll go back to the example of the ice cream chuck. But just before we talk about that, I'd just like to have a quick mosey about the goals part of this. So what goals should we have? I believe that regardless of what products you're looking after, there's two fairly universal aspects to success. There is value, which is basically, you can think of it as, does it work for users? So is this product doing what it promises to do? Are people getting value from it? Why are they getting value from it? Is it how you expected them to? Or are they using it in new and unusual ways? The second part to success is growth, which you can kind of think of as, do people actually use it? This is slightly more straightforward, but equally extremely important. So, how many people are using it? Do people come back and use the product again? Are people actually interested? Is there a disconnect between people saying that they're interested and how they actually behave? All of these sorts of things. You might be kind of thinking at this stage, don't these overlap somewhat? And yes, surely, if something is valuable, it's likely to be popular. And if something's popular, isn't it likely to be valuable? Well, no, not always. So this is McDonald's Arch Deluxe. It was a posh hamburger that was marketed to adults and to people of refined taste, which is my phrase, not theirs, and released in 1996. It had a massive marketing campaign, and I've seen figures quoted from 100 million to 300 million on research, production, and marketing, yet it completely failed to gain traction. The thing is, the hamburger was by all accounts better than McDonald's existing range. So the value was supposedly there. It really was a posh burger, as we might now call it. But somehow the marketing or the people just didn't want it. Well, it just wasn't hitting the spot. So this, I think, is a really good example of where value's been there, but the growth has kind of been, not ignored. I'm sure McDonald's were really hot on trying to make sure it grew and doing their marketing campaign, but it just wasn't vibing with their target market. An opposite example, which is extreme, I have to say, but this is where marketing was very successful, but value was not, is Fire Festival. I feel like it's probably too soon to bring this up as an example because it's kind of fresh in the minds of a lot of people at the moment. And it really went very far and was frankly fraudulent. You might have heard about this. So Fire Festival was marketed as a luxury music festival in 2017. The event was cancelled, but only after people started turning up and realised that the luxury villas and the gourmet meals they'd been told they would get were actually ended up being sort of pre-packaged sandwiches and I think emergency services tents. It was absolutely awful. So none of the value that had been promised to these people was actually given to them. Leaving aside the extremely dubious ethics of Fire Festival, I think is interesting about both of these is they weren't exactly bad ideas. So think of Shake Shack and Five Guys. There's actually lots of posh burger businesses that are now wildly successful today. You could even argue that Burger King has actually kind of moved itself over into that space where it's more expensive, posher burgers than maybe you would get at other competing fast food joints. So why didn't it work for McDonald's? Was it just not being realistic about their market and image in the 90s? Like, I don't know, but it's not a terrible idea. With Fire Festival, obviously, it wasn't a terrible idea. Lots of people thought it looked amazing and it was a great idea, but it was just there was no way they could deliver what they promised. Lots of festivals are very successful, and there's several luxury music festivals. So by all accounts, if they had pulled it off, it would have been great. But the focus was on marketing rather than the reality of what they could deliver. So end of, I think it's good to focus on both, particularly very early on in the stage where things might change quite a lot. So let's just go back to our ice cream van example. And just to remind you of the vision, this is our ice cream van app, which you can pre-order your ice creams on. And then when it tells you when the ice cream van turns up and you can go out and get your ice creams. Okay. So what I like to do as the next step is basically brainstorm all the possible goals that you could have under those two sort of banners. You'll see on the value side, and I'm sorry that this is quite a busy slide. So on the value side, there's a lot of things that you can do, and it's wildly divergent. So we could have a strategy that we want the tastiest ice cream. So, we believe that our ice cream is just better than everyone else's. We could be trying to compete on the fact that it's a better experience than going to a shop. So where like you get out in the sun, people can do it with people. Closely related to that, maybe this is a time-stamped thing. Maybe we had a shop and a physical shop, ice cream shop, and it's not getting traction because we're in lockdown and things. So we wanted to create a lockdown-friendly activity. Something like that could be competing on. We could be competing on the healthy options thing, which I sort of just mentioned, so I won't go into too much. And also, I don't know, and I was kind of like looking at absolutely everything. Maybe it's just a shorter distance for you than going to the shop. Maybe it's more convenient for you. I don't know. You will totally get a sense that some of these are more useful or more compelling that you might feel naturally than others, and that's totally normal. we will be prioritizing these. On the growth side, there isn't so much kind of choice, if you like, because the way that we think of growth tends to be a little bit more limited. But there isn't just one way of thinking about it. So yes, we could be thinking about money made, but we could also think about growth as number of app users that we get per day or number of ice creams sold. And these are arguably better because they tell you more about people getting value or people using it, which you can then monetize anyway as a second step, rather than just focusing on money on its own. So I said that the next step was sort of to prioritize. So I've decided that for this particular venture that we're now all going into, we did used to own a physical shop, and we do think that our ice cream is tastier than everyone else's. So that's the thing that we're going to try and compete on the most. And, other things are like there as well, but that's the most important one. From a growth perspective, I've decided to first focus on, as priority number one, number of users that we get per day. Now, the reason that I've decided to focus on this, because I think it's actually quite a dubious business model potentially. And so before I invest too much in the ice cream van and building the app and everything else, I'd like to know that we actually were getting traction and people were actually interested in getting on the app and getting on it, sort of thing. So the next sort of step down is to derive your success metrics. So for tastiest ice cream, maybe our success metric, and there's all sorts of things that we could do, but I've landed on we will survey people after they've used our service, and we can say the percentage of people who say it's tastier than the most popular brand. I was trying to think of other types of success metrics, and you could sort of do it by, like, I don't know, asking people, or you could compare it to something else. You could say, what's it on a scale of 1 to 10? How tasty is it? Or you could do a sort of more general user satisfaction thing. I don't know. I was struggling with that a bit. I thought it was actually quite difficult. The next step then from that, and I thought this was quite good. So percentage of people who say it's tastier than the most popular brand. How would we track this? What other information might be useful for us to understand so that we know if we're going to try and hit this or not? There's various things that we can do. So I thought it was interesting to also maybe ask people at the same time as asking this survey question, what their satisfaction was with the overall service. Now, the reason this might be interesting for us, and I would highly recommend everyone having some sort of user satisfaction rating within their service, is because maybe people will say the ice cream isn't very tasty, but the overall satisfaction with the service is really high. Now, if that's what this was the case, it would really tell us maybe we should be looking at focusing on maximizing something else about the service. People are obviously getting some other value out of this. Maybe it's the fact that it's the experience side, and we should make that the cornerstone of our strategy instead. So that's the kind of pivot that you could do with that information. Other indicators could be things like number of complaints. So we obviously would want a low number of complaints, and that would tell us that it's going well. So say people didn't think it was that tasty, but they weren't complaining. Well, we know that they don't think it's like not tasty. So that's quite useful information for us. Similarly, maybe like people asking for their money back is something that we'd like to track as this. There's loads and loads of other examples that I'm sure you can think of, but those were just the ones that kind of sprang to mind as the top ones. On the growth side, we decided to prioritize number of users per day, and I've added to that to make it more of a strong goal. We would want more than the usual number of visits that we get to our physical shop, so that our existing physical shop. So what kind of success metric or signal, which is what is sometimes called in other frameworks, would we want for that? I do not know loads about the ice cream shopping business, so this is where my knowledge is starting to crack a little bit, but I thought 300 users a day sounded about right. So I've decided maybe it was 300 users that you'd have in a physical shop. So if we're hitting that or more, then we know that this is probably a really good venture. So just having that as our starter for 10 growth goal, success metric. How would we know that we're getting close to this, or what other things might we want to track to help us achieve this goal? Well, we'd certainly be interested in the number of people who downloaded the app, or you could think of this as sort of adoption. Or, I think the equivalent in a physical shop would be how many people are walking in the store, not necessarily how many people are using things or buying things. But if you don't have a lot of people who've downloaded the app, if you don't have 300 people who've downloaded the app, you will never be getting 300 users per day. It's like impossible. So you need to focus on that. Similarly, and almost sort of if you think about it as a bit of a journey from, people using the app, buying an ice cream, back is downloading the app, and back again is trying to sort of find our app or search for it. Maybe we're interested in the number of people who visit the App Store page. If we find that it's a very high number of people visiting that page, but not many people are downloading it, is there something that we could do better with the content on that page to help reach our target to get more people through that flow? We might also be interested in something like time spent on app. This might tell us something about the quality of the 300 users that we're getting per day. If they're spending minus 1 second or something, then they're not really engaged users. We wouldn't think of them as engaged users. If they're spending quite a while on it, or like having a look around, or sort of 30 seconds to buy their ice cream or whatever, it's maybe a better metric. Other things that we might be interested in is how much people are returning. So the number of times people are using the app per month per user, something like that, which would tell us, are we getting sort of super users? Are these 300 users a day made up of the same people who always come back? Or are they new users who then don't return? And why might that be? So those are just like sort of two broad examples. At this point, you may be sort of saying, okay, I get it, but how about we try and combine these two things together? Surely there's a way. And I'll be honest, so there is. It's kind of hard to get to. And this is something, called a North Star metric. So a North Star metric is basically the metric that you have to focus your growth. It best reflects the amount of value brought to customers, or this was my favorite definition of it so far. I will say that getting to a North Star metric when you're not entirely sure where the value that you're giving your customers might be is very difficult. But as you're getting up your sort of adoption curve, or as you're developing your business and you're becoming more certain about various things, you might think about having one. A lot of the top companies do. So it's basically a combination of value and growth, and you put them together, and everyone gets very, very focused around a particular indicator. I think the best way of sort of describing this is by looking at other companies that have North Star metrics, and a lot of the big ones do. So looking at sort of Uber and Amazon, it's sort of a hacky formula, if you like. A North Star metric is sort of a value to user described as a unit plus a time frame usually, and the time frame will be something about how often you think people should be using your service. So Uber and Amazon have really interesting, what I think of as quite ambitious targets, actually, quite ambitious North Star metrics. I think they're actually quite impressive. So Uber has its North Star metric as rides per week. So what it's basically saying is per user, you should be using its service every week, which is, like just quite an ambitious, quite a confident strategy to have. So that's what they're trying to maximize all the time. Similarly, Amazon, number of purchases per user per month. So it's on a slightly wider time frame, but maybe they find that there's clustering of people buying things. You buy lots and lots of things over one weekend in a month, as opposed to sort of really buying steadily from week to week. And again, I think a really interesting, quite aggressive, very focused metric. Conversely, Facebook's got a really interesting one, and I've heard on the grapevine that they've tried to change it over time to get a little bit more focused. So Facebook says monthly active users, and I believe it defines active as if you do a post, if you respond to a message, if you kind of, sign up to an event, sort of these like big actions, if you like. It's an interesting, and I can see why they might have tried to focus it a little bit more, because Facebook has got lots and lots of different platforms. So it's trying to create a catch-all for its whole company. It does so many things. Maybe you're not using its events platform as often as you use a social media platform. But it feels like the deciding that, you're giving equal weighting. They're giving equal weighting to someone who goes on and likes something once or something, or writes one comment in a month, and someone who goes on every day, these sort of power users who are going on every day. So it seems a bit odd that they're not making a differentiation between that in their business model. Slack is a messaging app for you people who don't know. So it's a little bit like Facebook Messenger or something, but it's used in organizations a little bit more. And that's got a much tighter, much more aggressive, not aggressive, I shouldn't say aggressive, ambitious metric. So it counts daily active users instead. It's quite an interesting one as well. I don't know how Slack deal with when organizations, people aren't working on the weekend, so maybe they're not using Slack on the weekend. So they're obviously going to have downtime for that all the time, which will bring down their score. But I think it's a really interesting thing and a really interesting way of them to measure. What you might be getting from this is there's always a bit of a give and take with North Star metrics. They're very rarely perfect, actually. You might look at rides per week or number of purchases per month. That tells you that they've got an amount of value, but it doesn't tell you how much customers enjoy their ride, or if it was a good experience, or if they're enjoying their purchases or they're good quality. So you're always going to kind of end up with a little bit of a compromise in one way or another. So going back to our example, imagine that we were successful and it really was the tastiest ice cream. And we were like, no, that should be our strategy. And the growth was still, we're interested in users per day. I was trying to think the sort of North Star metrics that we might have. So maybe it would be ice cream sold per user per month, or ice cream sold per day. I don't know, and it completely depends, and we'd only know when we got a little bit further along the way which one of those felt right and which one of those we wanted to sort of unite everyone in our company around and work towards. So I think the amazing thing from this, just to remember, is your metrics will not be perfect and they don't have to stay static. You can change them as you go along. But I highly recommend that as you do that, you keep score and really do it as a conscious decision rather than moving away from a metric just because you've not, because you're sort of like, this is not working, or you're failing at something. So just as a bit of a conclusion or a recap, data helps you rigorously test your ideas. The better you can articulate your metrics, so value, growth, North Star, the more focused your strategy is just by necessity. So it's a brilliant thing to get into as soon as possible if you possibly can. Analytics don't need to be perfect. They grow with your product. They grow as they change your strategy, but keep score because you'll become a better product manager. You'll understand better your weak spots if you look back at your decisions that you made previously. Understand that you failed, but try and pinpoint why that was. Cool. So thus concludes my chat. I wonder if we've got any questions, Alex.
Yeah, I was going to say, first of all, thank you very much. That was amazing. Yeah, loved it. We actually had a really good question from Cynthia kind of part way through. I think if anyone else has got any questions, let us know in the chat. But yeah, first and foremost, Cynthia asked around the McDonald's point. If a campaign fails or doesn't generate the response predicted, how best does a product manager handle it in that situation? And does the failed campaign reflect negatively against them?
So that's a really fantastic question.
That's what I said.
Yeah, it's a really fantastic question. So, and I mean, the idea, I'm hoping that someone else has done a bit of a talk about agile methodologies and how we limit that. Basically, as a product manager, you're completely fine to fail, but you should be taking risks that are aligned to the information and the evidence that you have. So in the McDonald's case, which is really interesting, maybe what they needed to do was spend more time on local small rollouts, or see, if it was working in, I don't know, New York better than Arkansas. I don't know, like something like that. And then maybe they needed to have targeted what they did ever so slightly more. They could have done an approach like that just to limit down the risk that they were taking. You are sometimes going to be in situations where you just do have to spend the money and you are taking larger risks, but it's always just about mitigating it as best you can. You shouldn't be afraid of failure at all. And failure in and of itself should never reflect negatively against you, although it can be really, really difficult to get your thinking outside of that because we are all human. And imagine you're in a casino or something, chasing after sunk costs. It can be very difficult if you've invested a lot in something to move away from it. But your responsibility is also to be able to do that pivot and make those hard choices if the evidence that you're faced with doesn't support that the fact it's going to be successful. So it's really hard, but frankly, it is the kind of crux of the job. So it's really important to just do it on a case-by-case basis and use your best judgment.
Awesome. Well, I don't think we have too many more questions streaming through. I think for anyone still listening, if you do have any questions for us or for Hannah or for anything kind of related to the topic, as ever, our Discord's always open. I think I just want to take a minute to say a massive thank you to you, Hannah. I know a lot of work has gone into that talk, gone into the presentation, and it's been amazing to have you. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex, as well. Take care.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.